Hey there everyone, this is Chess Coach Aaron. How you guys doing? And I'm here for my third video of Petrov defense or Russian defense games. There were three main forks in the road for what white would do against you. And I wanted each one of the videos to have games from each fork in the road of how black responded to white's choices. So let's get started with the beginning of the Russian defense, Petrov defense. And that is, we attack their pawn on e4 when they attack our pawn on e5. We don't protect our pawn, we make our own threat. Most players are going to see if you know what to do, which is to chase their knight away with d6. Knight runs back, and now we can safely take our pawn back. And I already think black's doing fine here. The three forks in a road were queen goes to the e line, e2 to pin the knight. White moves the d pawn, either d3 or d4, moves it forward. d3 will try to chase your knight away. d4 will try to take more to center and perhaps threaten expanding and taking over even more space, getting to d5 if possible, if black lets it happen. And then the third fork of the road, which is today, is, and it's very popular recently in the past 5 years or so, especially at the top level of chess, very interesting, which is knight c3, which is another way to challenge this knight, which is on white's side of the board. Again, this side of the board is white's territory, and early in the game, usually you want to challenge your opponent's pieces and say, hey, what are you doing on my side of the board? Ask them a question. What are you doing here? The same with when white captured on e5, black challenged right away and said, what are you doing on my side of the board? So this is a very big decision for black already, which is, how do they deal with this? Now they can't, and I've already discussed this before, they can't protect the knight. They actually can't. It's really losing at this point. Most beginners will see that queen e7 is behind the knight, threatening the queen, and this should be good. But with this knight here, for example, boop, the knight, now there's something aiming for d5 and it's a knight. The knight has a moment to jump out of the way, whoops, of this attack. Wow, my arrows are bad today already. And by playing knight d5, you're actually attacking the queen. So this knight doesn't have time to do a discovered check because simply knight would just capture e7, removing the checking queen. And that's not good for black, right? So black has to deal with this queen. Now, can it stay on the e line? I mean, that's the whole point to play here, right? Well, if it goes to e6, now there's this nasty fork on c7. It can't go to e5. It's already protected. So really, this queen has to stay guarding c7 and has to leave the e line. Not good. It can go home, or it can block its own bishop in, and this is not a good start from white already. After they go back, now white can pin this knight, and black can't spend time to unpin it, or they can, but that would just lose a queen. So already black is probably losing here. This is an awful position. All right, so if they go d5 with the pawn, it doesn't really change anything, right? Because then queen can go and pin. Whoop. And now what do? d3 is a big, whoops, is a big threat if they don't unpin it. So they could give away the pawn, whoop, by playing bishop e7, and then they're down a pawn for no reason, they being black here. So the main gist of it is this knight c3 is very interesting because it challenges the knight, and the knight can't be protected. But it doesn't mean that the game is over. Hardly. So many beginners will play back, and definitely, if you don't want to do trades or go into what white is planning, because I'll show you white's plan, definitely just run back. And after something like d4 and d5, white has its first turn advantage with an extra tall piece out. All right. But this is kind of a normal advantage for white in most games. They have a little more space or the extra first turn. So as long as black pays attention, I mean, black's not doing necessarily bad here at all. All of his pieces are happy. And notice, I'm very interested in playing a Russian defense for beginners because it's easy to make all your pieces happy. Happy means lots of choices. So even though black's behind one move, you know, that's kind of standard for many openings anyway, since white has the first turn advantage. All right, but that being said, the more interesting line is to actually take, whoops, I lost a pawn for white, is to take on c3 because now white's forced to take back, right? And after they take back, let's say we just move a piece just for fun, and I'm not saying this is the best move, it actually isn't, but let's say we just move a piece for black, and with an equal number of moves, each side has one tall piece out, and each side has one pawn forward. So, in terms of happiness and development, still, there's this happiness function, where white actually is happier. And why do I keep making these pieces go to the wrong spot? What is wrong with me today? Coach Aaron, wake up. Maybe I'll have one more sip of coffee. But back to this. White's pieces are definitely happier. So, that being said, and we're only talking one piece difference for happiness, really, because this bishop will be happy once the pawn goes forward. So, black is not far behind. But in terms of development, it's very equal. And in terms of happiness, black's only a little bit behind. But that being said, why would white allow these doubled pawns, and why would white go into a line where it seems like black's not really far behind at all in happiness or development? Well, these are good questions. So, the idea, and let's flip it real quick, the idea from white here is simply, they know, first of all, they're testing as usual. It's why they took the e-pawn earlier. They're testing if black knows what they're doing here. And they know that black shouldn't protect the knight. The knight should run away. And yes, c5 was a choice too, but I didn't want to talk about that because to me, if you're going to keep the piece, you keep it on the king side. It started off on the king side, keep it on the king side. But you could play knight c5, but now you're going to give up a free move into the center, so it makes no sense to go to c5. But white is testing black here. And the most normal move, especially at the highest levels of chess, Caruana, #2 player in the world, plays a ton, or used to play a ton of Petrovs. He played it all the way up to the World Championship match against Magnus. He played it regularly for black, the Russian defense, Petrov defense, and he faced a lot of this, and he would take every time. So if the #2 player in the world is taking, I think he's confident that black has enough here to definitely hold on, for sure. But let's show you what white is thinking. White is thinking they're going to take with the D pawn, which seems kind of weird, because if you take with the B pawn, you're going towards the sweet center. And early in openings, in the opening phase of a game, you really want to fight for these 4 squares, so this would make sense. But the idea is you take with the D pawn, and suddenly you have these 4 pawns on one side of the board, and they make a great fortress for the king. It's tough to have doubled pawns, because you make your own pawn stuck in mud very easily, and it's tough to go forward and work, as you're moving forward. It's tough work for these pawns, but if they don't need to move forward, if they're going to stay back as a fortress, they're really strong. And this opens up the D line for the queen and for the bishop, so this one pawn capture made 2 pieces extremely happy. And then, if white's plan is to castle long anyway, because of this fortress of 4 pawns, the rook on D1 also will be very strong and put a lot of pressure on black's position. So the normal move order for white would be, after capturing, and again, I'm not making black moves anymore, 1, 2, and then 3. And then they have a bunch of further ideas from here. Now, normally, if black just castles short, white is just going to do a pawn storm, right? Put a bishop here, perhaps, if needed. Maybe get a knight in the center if needed, but get these pawns just rolling forward. Why not? This king is on the queen side behind this 4-pawn fortress. King can slide over to b1 if needed. And these are kind of like the opposite side attacks, but white does pretty well with that here if black is not paying attention especially, and white gets to jump on this pawn storm on the king side. Black has to be very careful, actually. You can't just not get your pieces happy, castle on the king side, and just let white get a free attack, basically. This is not fun for black. White would have all the fun. So this is the normal idea for white. So now let's flip it back, and let's set it up one more time, and then we'll get to the game I have today. And the game is... why is this not setting up? Hold on. And here we are. So, white playing on move number 5, knight c3. And here we are, it's move number 5, boop, knight c3, challenging the knight. This is the 3rd fork in the road for white, and this is called the Nimzovich attack. Not that you need to remember the name, but this is the Nimzovich attack. Many good players are playing this now for white. I think black's okay after capturing, and the #1 move that computers or the books will say, if it's in a book and you're looking at this, or some videos that talk about this position, is to do bishop e7 and just castle quickly. Well, I think that just falls in the hands of white's plan, and I don't think that challenges white at all. I actually like d5 right away. I like taking a little bit more of that center and making this bishop very strong, giving it many more choices. But I think taking this one move opportunity into the center is actually very important. I think putting the bishop on d6 makes a lot more sense for black. But of course, you can't put the bishop on d6 right away because the pawn won't be protected. What do we do about it, Coach Aaron? Good question. I actually believe bishop e6 would be the next move. And you're protecting the pawn, but you're also aiming to the queen side. And where is the white king thinking of going? The queen side. So, normal first move for white. Now we protect our d-pawn because we want to put our bishop on d6 also. And notice I'm not afraid at the right time of putting a bishop and making it kind of like a tall pawn. Pawn protects bishop. Whoops. Bishop and protects pawn. It looks like a tall pawn. And in many openings, that's bad. And I'm not afraid of this bishop getting captured, by the way, by their knight. Because then the bishop will just get captured by the pawn, and now our f-pawn would be a center pawn. Now, it is a little tough because it's behind the other pawn. You want to get it moving and have a super strong, snowplow pawn center pawn duo. So you want to, if they take your bishop, if they spend time, which you don't mind, because there's a couple moves for them to even take it, and your pawn is here, then you want to get that pawn going as soon as possible. And if they do that also, by the way, it means you have an open f-line for a rook. Great. But I think this is very important, especially because we know what white's plan is. They go forward, now our bishop goes to d6. And notice, our two bishops are already covering a lot of territory. This is excellent. We can still play c6, making this pawn very strong and supporting everything, letting our queen go over to the queen side. If they castle, you can go that way. Your knight still can go to d7 as needed if you play c6 with your pawn and making this pawn very strong. And you'd like to keep your opponent guessing where you're going to castle also, right? So even though you probably will castle short, don't do it right away if you don't have to, and keep them guessing. One more move would be, right, they castle, whoop, and now I would play maybe knight d7. And this just gives you a lot of flexibility and a lot of options. Why knight d7? Good question. Well, they're going to play something to d4 anyway. Are you going to challenge it and take it and undouble their pawns? Probably not. And yes, they do have a lot of pressure, so you'd rather have a pawn on c6 when needed to protect it, maybe. Maybe. But the main reason I like knight d7 is the flexibility to go to the king side. You traded away this knight early in the game, but now you can play knight f6, protecting perhaps h7 as needed. Or, depending, then that's the flexibility I like here. Or you, at the right time, you can go to knight to b6, right? You can go to f6, covers a lot of stuff here on the king side in case they try to start storming, or to put a bishop here and try to aim for h7, right? You can put the knight and put the bishop, right? So this knight on the king side would be very helpful, or sometimes you'll go to the queen side, especially if you want to castle queen side. But on the queen side, it does aim going to c4, putting a lot of pressure perhaps on their position. Nice. And if they try to remove it, well, you don't mind that because that would activate your rook. All right, so I actually think an early d5 and get these bishops in the center, and I think black is doing very well against the system. All right, let's get to the game I wanted to show with what happened. It was very interesting. I'll try not to go too much into a lot of the moves, but I do want to show you the game. Hold on. All right, this was a game I came across, and it's from 2001, and I thought it was just very interesting, and I figured let's just show it. And again, when you want to look for games to show examples of, you can always find a bunch if you really need to. There's a lot of good places. All right, so again, this is the Russian defense, the Petrov defense, and white plays 5, knight c3, challenging this knight, and this is called the Nimzowitsch attack. Okay. White captures back with the d-pawn, right? And you already know white's plan, right? They're probably going to play bishop forward, queen goes to d2, castle long, and take it from there, and perhaps do a kingside expansion. Whoop, let's get these arrows correct. So black kind of knows this, and they play d5, and that's the reason why I saw this game. Excellent, I love it. So white's doing their normal moves, bishop e3. Now black played a move I did not expect. It turns out black really plays a little bit spicy. He's a spicy player. He likes to push the envelope and make things complicated. And since he knows white's plan is to castle queenside, keep this fortress intact. Well, by putting the bishop here, it's already putting pressure on c2. Interesting. I'd rather play it to e6 and protect this so I can move my bishop. But notice, right now, bishop going to d6, next move would lose a pawn. All right. So, the number one move in this position, by the way, that the computer says, would still be bishop e7. And you can play bishop e7 if you don't want to move your light square bishop out. If you don't want to play e6 or f5. You definitely can still play bishop e7. White can challenge that center, which sometimes they do with the double pawns. I think they should castle first before they even play that. Get the pressure on the D line. But they could play that. And you actually don't want to give a queen trade up, right? If you capture, you're giving up a queen trade. You don't lose castling, because that's why you have your bishop there, but you don't want an early queen trade. So since your idea was to play c6 anyway, why not protect it? And then after c takes and c takes, all the black pieces are very happy. c6 is available for the knight now if you want. Bishop, light squared bishop's got tons of places to go. Black's still going to castle. You have an open c line to aim for the queen side if they castle there. The one big drawback is black has this one pawn, and it's what we call a weak pawn, an isolated pawn, because no other pawn can protect it. So black might have to babysit this pawn a lot during the game, and it gives white a target, especially if they're going to castle long and put a rook and queen aiming at it. All right. Well, one of the other choices is, I said to play bishop e6, and here we go. Boom, 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 boom. And again, I love this position. Very flexible. White's not even 100% sure which way black is going, and this is important. All right, but he played bishop f5. Very interesting. So white's going along the normal plan, right? Queen d2. And now the computer, because I did put this game through the computer also, not that I always go by computer moves. We're humans. But the computer can be useful. And black plays a very spicy move. Very interesting. I'll explain why he played it in 1 second. But the computer hates it. Gave it a double question mark. And that's simply because black is challenging white. Challenging white. White's making these moves. There's an order of moves that white would normally play. And the next move is to castle and get the king over on this queen side behind this fortress. Black is challenging white to do something else. Go ahead, take this pawn, I dare you. That means you haven't castled. And then, perhaps, white takes, right, this pawn, boop. And now the bishop was aiming at the c pawn, bishop takes c pawn, and now white can't castle queenside for the moment anyway. This bishop's in the way. Can't castle through check. And it's a pawn trade. So this is a challenge to white. And now the reason why the computer likes this is because computers can see further. They say, all right, we'll take this pawn. We're up a pawn. But again, if white's plan was to castle long, and notice this rook now can go to b8 and could take the b pawn or attack on the queen side. This is not quite what white was looking for, even though white's up a pawn, right? This is not white's idea. So this challenge that black did was saying, all right, you're not going to get your normal game, but you can get a pawn. Are you up to that challenge? Now, should white have done it? I think, I'm very greedy. I try to take pawns when I can, but you double check. And if you want to castle long, if you want to get in this position as white, if that is your plan, then yes, you're not going to take the pawn. And that's kind of what happened, right? If you want this position for white, you're not going to take this pawn. Okay. At least not until you've castled. Then if black is offering a pawn, then yeah, you probably take the pawn for sure. But anyway, so bishop f5, which is aiming at the c pawn, kind of saying, all right, you'll take the d pawn, I take the c pawn, but you won't be able to castle, maybe. So queen forward, so they can castle long, and knight d7, very challenging. Maybe not the best move, but I love the challenge. Playing spicy. All right, so white castled, and now you give black the opportunity to now protect this pawn, and they get this great development. And now they actually had two choices. They could go knight b6 is what they played, put it on the queen side, and it does cover c4, making it hard for white to undouble the pawns. All right, and maybe the knight later can still go to c4, putting a lot of pressure on the white position. Very nice. But the most important reason why you're moving it is to protect that pawn and double protect it, simply because the knight's blocking the queen. But the other option is you could also go to king side. Definitely that is a real option. If you go knight f6, and here's one particular option. All right, they pin the knight, and they open up this line now. You unpin it, and you can castle. They develop their bishop, and your bishop is very strong and annoying, so they aim for it. Okay, and you can jump out of the way, or you can capture. But capturing here doesn't make as much sense, because you're going to undouble their pawns. But you will not have the pressure aimed this battery at your d-pawn. But your d-pawn is really solid here because it's a strong pawn. Strong pawn means it can be protected by another pawn easily. And you can play c6 anytime you need to. So your pawn actually in d5 is a rock. It's strong. And the other thing, like I keep saying, that's great about c6 is it opens up the queen coming to the queen side and putting pressure on this area, which I always love to do, of course. Who doesn't love to attack the opponent, perhaps, with the queen? But, of course, the queen needs helpers, usually. But anyway, let's continue with what's possible here. You can save the bishop and play back, or you can, take the trade if you want to just do that real quick. But the point is, and after a couple more moves, and yes, their knight is really strong in the center, we castle, and there is this, it looks like a bit of a weak spot. And it is a bit of a weak spot, but black has more than enough for it. We can expand, and if they take, we can expand if they don't stop us. And we get a lot of activity. Our activity makes up for our not happy pawn. So they could pile up on here, okay? And you can just back up again, and that way they won't even win. And a pawn, I'm saying, and you can play c5 at the right time. And again, all your pieces are very solid and happy. There's no pins. They have no attack yet. It's great. And that's just one line to show you. All right. But he played knight b6. You could have played f6 instead. But b6 is very interesting. So now white moves the bishop to e2. I don't think this is a great place for the bishop. What's it doing here? I probably play bishop d3, challenging black's strong bishop. Challenging, saying, what are you doing over here? And again, black can take, or black can run away. You got g6 or e6 perhaps. You could even maybe get away with bishop forward, but I mean, I wouldn't think about doing that. So if you have to move the bishop as white, I would put it on d6. But I actually like much better than those, because you're not quite sure where the bishop wants to go. I like knight d4 first. If you're going to play bishop f5, you're giving white this center move with the knight, which attacks the bishop, and this is a great place for the knight. All right, let's keep moving forward. They played bishop e2 and bishop d6. Perfect. Now they played knight d4. All right. And black has played to keep this bishop on this diagonal, right? Aiming for the c2 pawn and near where the king is. So they keep it on the diagonal. They didn't necessarily have to. Again, they could play d7. So I kind of understand playing back to g6. But this does allow white to get this really nice check-in. Checkers! And what would happen if black, blocks? Well, they played king f8, but if they block, which is the only way to block in this position, other than running backwards. So they could have blocked with a knight. Not what they necessarily want to do, but they could have, and that way they could go c6 soon, because c6 attacks the bishop and protects the pawn. So c6 is very nice. But it's just that in this position, there's a knight there too. So c6, knight captures, pawn, bishop captures with check, king has to go over, and now you say, Coach Aaron, is it really good to give up two pieces for a rook? The answer usually is absolutely not. But if you can get a rook and one pawn, it's roughly equal. But you'd rather have the two pieces in the middle game. But once you give up two pieces, but they have a rook and two pawns, or a rook and three pawns, that's much better for the rook with all the extra pawns. And we're not just counting points. We're just talking about how the game would play out. So here, white's already up two pawns, but he actually can get a third pawn. And two small pieces, and let's continue, two small pieces, whoop, and notice you got to remove the defender of the third pawn that white wants to win. Two small pieces, and here it's two bishops for a rook. The two bishops by themselves would be better, but look how many pawns white has. There's 7 pawns for white and only 4 for black. That's 3 extra pawns. So 3 pawns and a rook versus 2 bishops. I'll take the 3 pawns and the rook because you're going to get kind of the pawns rolling and get an extra queen. Boom. It's kind of going to happen. And here, black does not have time to take this pawn and get a pawn back because there's this battery aiming down the D line and this bishop is hanging with check. So basically, this is forced. Trade, take, and black's got to get the bishop out of the way of the rook with a check. But you can see here, white has 4 pawns on one side of the board versus 1 black pawn. This is just, and yes, it's going to take a little work, a little time. Pawns are slow. And the king is on the right side of the board for white already. Can work with the pawns if needed. But this is just an avalanche of pawns. And this is just going to be too much. There's no way for black to come back in this game, ultimately. It's going to take some work for white to still win. Because it's a slow process, but it's just inevitable. At least that's what it looks like. Without making any big blunders, of course. I'm just explaining when you should do a rook for 2 pieces. You definitely want at least 2 pawns, and if you get 3, like here, this is really good for the side with just a rook. All right. So bishop going to g6 here, right? If you went to d7, you would take care of this check no matter what. But if we go into g6 because black wants it in its diagonal, he does allow this check. But I think he was ready for it. Maybe he didn't quite plan it this way, but I think he was ready for it. And the video's already kind of running long. Let's run through some moves real quick. And yes, here, g4, even though it looks like it's the pawn star that you're thinking about, might be a mistake because it gives this bishop a great place to go. Boom. And now the bishop gets out of the way of these pawns, right? It gets out of the way of any attacks on there. C7, I was going to say c7. f7 is now open for the king to get out of the way in case this rook needs to come over. And who is actually controlling the sweet center for a moment? All right, and white's got to deal with this pin, and the knight is actually not protected. So they get the rook to h3, and they use this piece to protect and get out of the pin. So you can understand why they did it. But black plays this very complicated and interesting move. The one thing, though, is black played c5 to chase this knight out of the center. By playing c4, you're now letting this knight go right back in. And this is actually going to be very annoying to black. So even though black's playing some interesting moves, and they actually have a big threat here, white still has an excellent position. I think black played a little bit risky with the bishop f5 line and trying to move to center before the king was safe. But all right, they played c4, allowing the knight to go here. But why did they do it? Good question. Well, their threat is simple. a6. And where can the bishop go now? Bishop can't run back, right? Bishop, if it goes to a4, the knight is here to capture it. So there's no safe moves to the bishop. It's kind of trapped. So c4 was trying to trap it. But if you look closer, there's actually bishop takes and queen takes this bishop. So bishop can take the pawn at the right time, perhaps, right? Knight is protecting it, so can't do it yet. But bishop takes, and then the queen can take the bishop on d6. So white would win a pawn if this knight's not here. Can white remove it? They can. So this looks good for white, actually. What's black doing? So maybe bishop takes, and then black's thinking pawn takes, and rook will be open and attack the queen side and his king. Maybe that's it. Ha-ha! So this is what white says, all right, I'm going to go for this. This bishop will be trapped if they play a6, right? Don't want that to happen, but I can win a pawn. Black saw further. So I'll just show this real quick, and the video will be done. Bishop removed the defender, the extra defender of c4, and black took with the queen. Very smart, because this looks like an easy pawn for white. Capture on c4. If they take back, you get the bishop with check, and it looks like white's really dominating here. White's winning. So white takes that pawn, but black saw further, and that is, once this dark squared bishop is gone, suddenly f4 becomes a very tender spot, and this strong bishop for black, which has been sitting on d6, helping control the whole board, comes to life. This simple little move, queen b6 capturing the knight, attacking the bishop, and then when the bishop captures, you move back, because this is what we call a battery, right? White has this battery putting pressure on the d-pawn, but black now has this battery and bishop going to f4. Well, by itself, it wouldn't win if white has time to get out of the way, but notice this bishop is also being attacked. So this is what we call a double threat or a double attack. Bishop to f4, pinning the queen, and we're attacking this bishop. So you can lose a pawn or two, but if you get a piece, you're doing pretty good for it, right? So it looks like, is it black winning now? And they realized, or maybe they didn't see it, but they realized they need to get as much as they can for the queen, perhaps, because just losing a piece is losing. Maybe they want to get as much as they can for the queen. So in this position, if we look real quick, boom, they're going to have, after bishop takes the queen, right? So the bishop and the queen are going to be gone. They're going to have two small pieces and two pawns for the black queen. So this is going to be 8 points for 9 points. But the two extra pawns are actually doubled. They're back to back and they're slow. So they don't only count for that much. And the queen is a lot faster than two small pieces. So actually black has a huge advantage here. I don't have time to go into other moves. I want to cut this short, but I'm going to just run through the rest of the moves, and you can see how black did a great job of trading pieces. And he even did a quick little trap here at the end. Notice how it's weak back here. So you might say, well, why can't the knight, right, get some material back here? Well, queen would just take, and notice this would be checkmate. So white sets up a trap. Black sets up a trap, rather. White didn't fall for it, but instead white played bishop f5. And now can black take the bishop? No, because check. And if they take the bishop, very clever. Now white's winning because they get the queen, but they also protect against the checkmate on the back rank. But in the actual game, they played bishop f5. And does black have to capture an f5? No. So they did the smart move, which is they take on d4. They remove the protection. They take away any checks. And notice, rook can't capture because, again, there's checkmate in the back rank. They have to take the pawn. And here, white resigned. This pawn's too far away. There's no way for it to become a queen. The king can get in front or the queen. And there's no way for white to deal with this position. So, good game. Black played a good game. Nice and spicy and challenged white. All right, I went a little longer than I meant to. And don't even have time for a joke. I hate to say it. All right, guys, play the Petrov defense. I hope this game helps. You play against the Nimzovich attack, knight c3, on move number 5 by white. Have a great weekend, guys. Peace.